My name is Daniel Hirsch. I'm the retired director of the Program on Environmental and Nuclear Policy at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm also the president of the Committee to Bridge the Gap, an NGO specializing in nuclear matters. I'm joined today by Dale Bridenbaugh, a retired nuclear engineer who will help provide some background to the Fukushima disaster that brought us to the present controversy. Dale, tell us, if you will, about your history, going back to the 1970s. Trying to raise concerns about the General Electric boiling water reactor design and its controversial Mark I containment, and what ended up happening at Fukushima's reactors.
My name is Dale Bridenbaugh. I'm a retired nuclear engineer. I had worked for the General Electric company on many different power plant projects, but my experience with nuclear began with the construction of the Dresden 1 plant in the 1950s. After that, I was transferred to GE's nuclear division in San Jose, where I was the manager of product service and followed the operation of all of the BWRs that had been placed in service at that time. In 1975, the NRC became aware through a review of some testing results on future containment systems that there might be some unanalyzed problems with the Mark Is, and the NRC asked the Mark I utilities to tell them what had been done to bring them up to date with the new load data. GE put together a program to assist the utilities owning Mark Is, and I was asked to be the project manager of that reanalysis of the Mark I systems.
And what did you find?
We found that there were problems, that the loads had not been properly analyzed. The pressure load was okay, but the dynamic loads, that is the pulsating loads that the containment might experience in the event of a loss of coolant accident, had not been considered in the design. And we began to try to identify the magnitude of the unanalyzed loads and come up with fixes that would make them meet the regulatory requirements. In 1976, we had a review meeting with the NRC and utilities back in Washington. And at that time, we still did not have the work done that would enable us to say if the plants were safe or not. I became concerned and I resigned from GE on February 2, 1976.
And what ended up happening at Fukushima?
What ended up happening at Fukushima was Fukushima is a 6-unit boiling water reactor plant. Excuse me. There are 4 Mark I design containments of the 6. And the seismic event that occurred wiped out all of the external power connections to the plant and also caused failure of all the on-site emergency power. With the loss of emergency power for cooling of the cooling water in the containment, eventually a hydrogen explosion occurred and the containment was breached. Following that, there were meltdowns in Unit 1 and Unit 3.
Thanks, Dale. So to summarize, you tried unsuccessfully to warn the company that manufactured the type of reactors used at Fukushima and the company's regulators that the containment might be flawed and not capable of withstanding the dynamic pressure loads during a loss of coolant accident. We saw the same pattern of the nuclear industry cutting safety corners to save money and the regulators rubber stamping those efforts in what led to the Fukushima accident. TEPCO, the owner of the Fukushima Daiichi plant, had claimed a major earthquake and tsunami were not possible, and the plant shouldn't be required to be designed to withstand them. The Japanese nuclear regulator went along. Then, of course, what was claimed to be impossible happened. A large earthquake and tsunami brought down off-site power and also destroyed the backup diesel generators. So there was no power to cool the reactors. And one by one, they melted down. And one by one, their containments failed, releasing massive radioactivity. Now, the same company and regulator are claiming it is safe to dump into the Pacific Ocean more than 1 million tons of radioactively contaminated water, currently stored in 1,000 tanks. They focus on the tritium in the water, but when pressed, concede there are numerous other radionuclides as well. Nuclear greenwashing advocates say the planned releases are completely safe. Indeed, one such group sent a letter to the Berkeley City Council opposing a proposed resolution of concern. And in that letter asserted that one could drink 2 liters per day of the planned release for a year. One would get the equivalent of 1/5 of a chest X-ray. They assert that the concentration is a mere 2-fold higher than EPA's drinking water limits. This is extremely misleading. The tritium concentrations alone in the water to be released from the tanks is 1,000 times higher than EPA's drinking water limits. Drinking water at the concentrations it is in the tanks for a year would produce the equivalent of 2,000 chest X-rays. To get around the regulatory limit, TEPCO plans to dilute the radioactive water many hundredfold. And then, of course, as has been pointed out by nuclear apologists, it will be diluted much further in the ocean. But the problem is that dilution is not the solution to pollution. It has been established for decades by the National Academy of Sciences, EPA, and all other radiation regulatory bodies that there is no safe level of radiation. Higher doses produce higher risk, lower doses produce lower risk, but there is no dose below which there is no risk. So when one proposes to dilute radioactive water to get it below a fictional regulatory limit, or even counting on the dilution in the massive ocean itself, one simply spreads the risk more widely. Furthermore, there are some biological processes that concentrate radionuclides and do so increasingly up the food chain. What we dump into the sea comes back to us in the fish we eat. To put this matter into perspective, the planned radioactive releases from Fukushima would not be the worst thing we have done to the ocean. Nuclear weapons tests released huge amounts of radioactivity into the seas. 80% of the airborne radioactive releases from the Fukushima accident itself went out to sea, much of it falling into the Pacific and incorporating itself into the marine food chain. So the proposed releases are not on par with those previous environmental insults. That said, releasing hundreds of trillions of becquerels of radioactivity over 20 to 30 years into the Pacific Ocean, as proposed by TEPCO, is not trivial, is not safe, and is not inconsequential. The same institutions that brought us the Fukushima accident are saying, trust them, this is safe. There is good reason to be skeptical. Thank you for listening.